welcome to Nasha's Art. Today I'm going to show you a few fun watercolour warm-ups. You'll need some basic watercolour paints. They don't have to be anything expensive or fancy, but if you like to use those, great. You'll need some brushes. I've got a fat and a thin one here. A few pens. I've got a fine tipped black pen. I've got a silver gel pen and I've got a white gel pen. You'll need some coffee granules, instant, decaf, doesn't really matter. Some salt, your usual water for mixing your watercolours, and finally a tea bag in what was hot water so that it would turn brown like this tea. Here are some of the techniques that we're going to look at today. We're going to start with a simple watercolour wash, but build up to some of these much more textured patterns, all done with watercolour and adding things like salt and coffee to create the textures. So I have my watercolour paper here. I'm not going to stretch it today over wood or anything like that. I'm just going to work straight on the pad because I really want to get on with my warm-ups. What I've done is I've spent a little bit of time and I've been patient and I've added a good amount of paint to my palette with a bit of water because I want a really rich colour on both the red and the blue. You don't have to use red and blue, you could use whatever colour you like, but you want two different colours that do look good when they mix together because we're going to have a go making our first watercolour wash. So I've wiped my brush on the side of my pot so it's not completely wet, and I'm picking up some of that red. And I'm going to start working my way down the paper, aiming to produce a rectangle. And I need to work quickly, so I've just dipped it in to pick up a little bit of blue as I go down. I'm still working quickly and I'm picking up more blue as I go down so that as I get down towards the further bottom of my wash, it begins to turn more purpley. Each time I'm picking up a little more blue and I'm working my way down until it changes from red to purple to much more blue. And you'll see how I have to work quite quickly. So that's my first wash. It's not perfect, but it was pretty fun to do. The technique we've just done is called wet on dry because we used wet watercolour on dry paper. We're now going to try wet on wet. So my brush is wet with plain water. And I'm going to still aim to try and do a rectangular shape, but I'm going to fill that rectangular shape with plain water. I'm not going to do it as long as the first one because by the time I get to the bottom it's going to dry, so it'll be a bit shorter than the last one, but I've just filled it with more or less plain water. I'm now going to very quickly pick up some colour. And I'm going to dab it and enjoy watching it spread all around where I've added that plain water. This is called wet on wet. And I might pick up one more colour that I think will look nice with it, maybe some yellow. And I'm going to add a bit of that yellow and watch it splurge and spread and even mix in with the orange. A very fun technique. I'm now going to do another rectangle with plain water, and this time we'll have a little experiment with wet on wet. And then we'll add some salt to it to see what happens. So right now I'm filling a rectangular shape with more or less plain water. I'm going to quickly choose a colour, fill my brush up with it, splurge it across and watch it spread, which is a lot of fun. I might add one more colour to it that I think will look really interesting. Let's go for a bluey green. Ooh, that's really nice. And now let's add a bit of salt to that and see what happens. So I'm just picking up a little bit of the salt, and you can see already there's quite a fun reaction. I'm going to try and move the camera closer. So you can see more clearly what happens when the salt is added. I'm going to do one plain wash here, just using the purple, so that you can get a sense of what the salt does to the paint. Right, let's add that salt. Where the little grains of salt land on the paint, it's as if the little paint particles move away from it. What I quite like doing is, once I've done that and I've put the salt on, I like going in with another colour as well and adding to the texture and watching how that reacts. It's really fun to create a sort of mottled effect and experiment with different sort of textures. How about that coffee? So I'm going to do a wet on wet, making a plain rectangle with just almost clear water. Then I'm going to work into that, splurging some yellow ochre, I think. And when I dab it, you can see that it's lovely because it spreads all over the wet water that I've added to the paper. And if I touch lightly, it spreads differently to if I press heavily. I'm now going to add a different colour in the middle of those blobs. I'm going to use this browny colour and add little dots to the middle. Now it's still wet because I'm working quite quickly. That looks pretty amazing as it is. But how about when we add the coffee? So I'm going to pick up a bit of the coffee and I'm going to just sort of squeeze it between my fingers and add it. And you can see already it's having this wonderful, exciting effect on the paint. So textural, looks like animal skin or something. And it smells really nice if you like the smell of coffee. For the tea bag one, I'm going to drain the tea bag and squeeze it out gently so that it's not dripping wet. I'm then going to use the tea bag to make my rectangle by literally just painting down. It's quite a good shaped tea bag for this. So I have a wash of tea. On that, I'm going to use a colour and dab it on. Notice it doesn't quite spread as much because it's not pure water. There's tea in there. I'm going to work in a darker colour now. Perhaps I'll use a darker green. Still have to work quite quickly because I don't want it to dry. I'm going to work the green in some of the gaps and watch it spread a little. It doesn't spread as much. going to add a little bit of salt. And I'm going to add a bit of dark green now. And see how that reacts and creates more texture where it mixes with the other two colours and the salt. You can have so much fun with these techniques, and you can transfer them to abstract art experiments if you like, or it could make quite nice textures for animal skin, trees, meadows, all sorts, blossoms. I quite like to label underneath each of my little trials, my tests. So this was wet on tea and salt. And if you keep a track of the different experiments you've done, you can then go back to them and use them later on, knowing what you did. So it's quite a good idea to keep a track. Another lovely thing that you can do is work into a dry watercolour wash. These happen to be wet on dry, and use pen. So I have a silver gel pen here, and you can just literally draw over any kind of patterns you like, and it looks really beautiful. You can do writing, you can do patterns, you can do really anything you want. And they look lovely. They work really well on the dark colours. You can see the silver really comes to life on this darker blue. The lighter colours, they don't show up as much. I'll show you what a white looks like. So I'm going to use a white on this fuchsia here. That also looks really nice, and you can draw, objects as well. You can literally do whatever you like, to be honest. And then the last one you can try is the black. The black looks lovely on brighter colours. Because it really stands out. So that's a lot of fun as well, to add to all the other techniques that you've got. I hope you've loved this tutorial and managed to try out lots of these different techniques and maybe even apply them to your own art. If you're interested in making your own paint, doing these techniques with paint that you've actually made yourself is incredibly fun. I have 2 tutorials that show you how to make your own paint using an avocado pit and different berries. I'll put the pop-up above, and I'll put the link in the description below. If you're interested in checking out my artwork, you can also find me on Instagram and Facebook at Nash Henkel Art.